bending, broken rule. Hound dog howling, bullfrog croaking. Everything is broken.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of Dad's Divorce Live. I'm Matt Allen, editor of DadsDivorce.com. Today we're talking with Sandy Keith. Sandy is the former Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court, and he has been practicing family law for actually now in his 50th year. Recently he's proposed mandatory early neutral evaluations for all divorcing couples that was sort of brought on about how the way he was seeing child custody cases being handled. So Sandy, thanks again for joining us.
Delighted to be here. By the way, they're not mandatory.
You want to make them mandatory.
We're not going to make them mandatory. But anyhow, let's talk about it, because what I've seen has just been a startling social revolution.
Right, and it's been 50 years.
Right. I started my practice in September of 1960 here in Rochester, Minnesota, southeastern Minnesota, the home of the Mayo Clinic. At that time, 90% of all marriages ended with the death of a spouse. Only 10% were divorced, and you had to prove fault.
Right.
The dad drank too much or did all kinds of bad things, or mom did the same. At that time, only 2 or 3% of our children were born out of wedlock. In 1960, when my son was born, my youngest son, we had 90,000 births in Minnesota, and only 2,700 of them were out of wedlock. Today, whether you realize it or not, nearly 50% of all marriages are dissolved in most areas of the country within 10 or 15 years. Many of them, of course, have children. And out of wedlocks have gone from 2 to 3% to over a third, and it's almost 40% of the children in my area of southeastern Minnesota are born out of wedlock. So so I lived through a really enormous transformation. And I ended up doing divorces, and most lawyers didn't enjoy it, practicing in this area. It's very emotional. It's very expensive and time-consuming, and they really. So I kind of enjoyed it, and working with these people, and they were from all walks of life. And the toughest problem was parents not agreeing how to raise or parent their children in 2 different homes. I hate the word custody.
Right.
Yeah, I just hate it. It's just nobody owns their children. You know, you try to raise them in 2 different homes. And you know, each state has certain laws that outline what courts should look for and judge should look for in terms of temporary hearings in this area or the final parenting hearing. And I just suddenly discovered that these hearings were just very, very hard on dad and mom.
Right.
You know, both tried to prove that they were the better parent, and they should have the legal or the physical custody of their children. And it was amazing what they would say and do under these circumstances, and how emotional they got, and how hard it was on their relationship once they took the stand or wrote these affidavits saying how they were the better person. And I decided, after a very difficult custody hearing between 2 lovely, well-educated people, that the system was damaging emotionally and financially to this couple, and that we shouldn't be doing this, and it was hurting children. And so we all sat down, the judge, myself, the social workers, and the child psychiatrist from the Mayo Clinic, and we set up an education course for parents contesting custody of their children. And I would give the first couple hours, and you know, the cost, I went through my records. It was amazing. 80% of my receivables were parenting disputes. Mm-hmm. The cost was 2 or 3 times what a normal divorce cost. The time usually took over a year to a year and a half. And it was very hard on children. And they often ended up having therapy and then going to one therapist after another. And we had a wonder then, we'd have the custody evaluator come in and describe the process. Very invasive, you know. They go into your private life, your sexual life, all of this, and report it all, and it's a public document. Mm-hmm. And finally, the child psychiatrist, we had a wonderful child psychiatrist, and said, you know, you two, if you love your children or your child, you will learn to raise them in 2 separate homes without fighting. He would point out, or she, I don't want both a man and woman psychiatrist, children usually don't want to make a choice. They want Dad and Mom to choose where they live. They hope Mom and Dad will live near each other if possible. Mm-hmm. They want Mom and Dad to communicate with one another. And we went from 40 tried custody cases that year to 2 cases the next year. And I never tried another custody case the rest of my career. And I went on the court in 1989. In between, I picked up mediation.
And you pretty much only do mediation now, right?
Now it's all I do now. In 1989, I was appointed to the Minnesota Supreme Court. In the following year, I was appointed Chief Justice. Then I was able to help put in place rules to help lawyers and practitioners and others settle these cases without these adversary hearings. You can't believe these affidavits that they write about each other and that sort of thing. We now have mediation, arbitration, collaborative law. You mentioned early neutral evaluation. I'm going to do one of those this afternoon. So this has been my experience, that the adversary system is not the right way to handle these questions. Basically, I found that I'll bet in these early neutral evaluations I've done, approximately, I think 60 in the last 3 years, and in 55 of those cases, the parents settle. They work out an agreement together. Wow. They often haven't spoken to each other for a long time. They'd often been very negative towards each other, and so it's been a wonderful experience for me. And in the mediations, I did one the other day where neither one of them needed lawyers.
Right.
And I just sat down with them, and they worked out together a very fair agreement.
So what are the advantages to these, I guess, mediation sessions? How are you able to work out such a high success rate of people who go into them?
Well, you've got to really point out to them that this is, one of the things that's just disastrous for these, because most people are young. The cost of these, most lawyers today are over $200 an hour.
Right.
You can spend thousands and thousands of dollars. I had a case I mediated the other day where the couple had spent $160,000
wow.
on attorney's fees, and Mom had been through 3 different lawyers, and Dad had only one. But when you sat down with them, we settled almost everything. I even did an arbitration the other day where the parties had been fighting for years, and then I become really the judge. Mm-hmm. And I just decide the issue, and it saved them thousands of dollars in fees.
Well, what techniques are used during mediation that can be beneficial to both parties not having to go to court?
Well, the one nice thing I like about mediation is it brings them together. And if you get it, and if you do this early on in the process, look, if the marriage isn't working, then they need to still communicate with one another, and I try to work with them to do that. If they have any problems with alcohol or drugs, obviously, let's get to treatment, and get working on it. If there's, problems with the other person has another person in their lives, obviously this has to be, addressed, and they have to talk about it. And because their child or children are going to have to learn to live in 2 separate worlds. The process it brings them together, and sometimes I have to meet with them 2 or 3 times, but for 2 or 3 hours at a time. But it's amazing how they begin to talk to one another again. Look, they loved one another at one time, So it's crazy with the system where we say, "Why am I the better parent and you're a terrible parent?" Well, that's not the way to go about it. None of us are perfect, and neither of us are perfect parents.
Sure. Well, congratulations again on your 50 years in practice in family law. Thanks again for joining us. That was Sandy Keith, the former Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court, and as I mentioned, celebrating his 50th year practicing family law. That'll do it for this edition of Dad's Divorce Live. I'm Matt Allen, editor of DadsDivorce.com, and we'll see you next time.
Broken pipe, broken tube, people bending